Oh, howdy all, grab yourself a drink. It is time for some PathOfExile discussion. Today I wanted to discuss the topic of Incursion in patch 3.22. I think there's a couple of reasons that Incursion is in a better place than it's been for several leagues, and the main thing is that the very wealthy players have a bit more currency to throw around, courtesy of Sanctum providing so much, courtesy of the Trials of the Ancestors content providing so much, and this means that some of the things you can't get anywhere else except through interacting with one specific mechanic have become a bit more expensive this league than they've been in the past. Enter Incursion Temples. Incursion Temples with double corruption chambers are the only way to get most unique items double corrupted, and on top of that they're the only way to get a usable double corrupted rare item. For most skill gems and support gems, the Incursion Temple is the only way to get a 21-23 version, or a 6/23 if it's an Awakened gem, or for those of you that are using Awakened Empower or Awakened Enlighten, it's the only realistic way to get a level 5 version of those gems. All of these factors mean that the wealthiest players in the game want things that can only come from Incursion, and if you're willing to generate those things, then they will be willing to pay for them. Now there are two main use cases for your Elva missions. The first one is that they can be used to add a lot of extra monsters to your existing maps. Especially if you're juicing your maps hard, this can be a big loot multiplier, because all of the monsters that you're adding with Elva can then have all of their loot multiplied by the map's native quantity, and then multiplied again by a divination scarab. Elva adds 3 additional rooms by default, but potentially as many as 4, and these will all be quite large. They'll be packed with monsters, and if you get lucky RNG procs, they can even be packed with magic monsters as well. Alternately, Elva can be used with a focus on making excellent temples of Axolotl. That's going to be the focus on this video. You can attempt to do both of these things at once. They do require slightly different support on the Atlas passive tree. For example, the resource reallocation cluster is pretty marginal for the purpose of using Alva to juice your maps, but is absolutely mandatory if you want to make good temples. The time dilation cluster is very weak if your goal is just to make good temples, but it is absolutely mandatory if you want to use Alva in order to juice your existing maps. You can do both of these things at once. There is some overlap between what you might want, but it is also possible to focus only on one of them to the exclusion of the other. Now, any strategy that revolves around Elva is going to run out of missions. One of the things that's really important about the 3.22 economy is that Sextants are extremely cheap. Between Sanctum enjoyers generating a huge amount of Awakened Sextants and consuming none themselves, Trials of the Ancestors enjoyers generating a huge amount of Sextants and consuming none themselves, and Delve enjoyers creating a huge amount of Sextants and consuming almost none of them themselves, it turns out in the 3.22 world that Awakened Sextants are very cheap, and so are sealed Sextants that contain anything in particular you want. At the time I was recording this video, I was able to purchase an entire stash tab, i.e. enough Sextants to force Elva onto 576 maps, which would generate 192 Incursion Temples. I was able to purchase all of those Sextants for 4.5 Divine Orbs. I think the act of me putting out this video might cause the price to go up a little bit, but I'm not expecting it to explode or anything, and I think you should be able to count upon getting these Sextants reasonably accessibly and reasonably cheaply. But even if they do run out, what you've got as an option is that you can always spec all of the Elva Master Mission Replenish that's on the tree, and then at that point just run a Searing Exarch cycle, really blitz to the boss fast, or you could do the same for Eater of Worlds if you prefer, or even allocate Destructive Play and run a whole bunch of maps with the Maven Witness. And once you've done that, not only will you get the regular rewards for running that content, but you'll also have a number of additional Elva missions so you can get started again. So using Alva to add juice isn't really the priority of this video, but it is a good option if you're running maps that have notable divination cards. You would run Beach, which has the Fortunate. There's plenty of other tile sets with the Fortunate as well. You'd run Crimson Temple for the Apothecary, 7 Years Bad Luck, or you could run Cemetery for Brother's Gift. All of these maps come to mind, but there's plenty of other good ones as well. Even if you're focused on building temples and you're not juicing your Elva maps, at least you should consider using a Rusted Divination Scarab, allocating Time Dilation Cluster, and running the missions on a map that has the Fortunate. This will definitely pay off if you have other sources of additional monsters on your maps. For example, maybe you're running a Legion strategy, maybe you're running an Abyss strategy. Incursion doesn't take up all the points on your Atlas, and so you'll have plenty left over to do things like that. Ultimately, it's up to you, but I think the best way to play around with Incursion content at the moment is not to have a razor focus on only doing the Elva content, but it is also to do other things at the same time. You've got lots of extra Atlas points, you may as well use them. So the basics of making temples in patch 3.22. Now I'm going to mention a number of prices for temples that have got specific important rooms in them. These prices are based upon the 9th of September. The further that you get away from that, the less accurate they're going to be. Additionally, these are prices that are aimed where you want to sell the temple, but you're not really a desperate seller, and you're okay with sitting on it for 3 to 6 hours before it moves. If you do want it to move faster than that, you can always undercut by 20C. So a Temple of Atzal'atl, it has a tier 3 corruption chamber, which is a room named Locus of Corruption. That's going to sell for about 250C fair market value, 230C if you want it gone straight away. A tier 3 gem room, Doriani's Institute, 165C or a bit less if you want it gone straight away. And the tier 3 sacrifice chamber, the Apex of Ascension, isn't actually worth all that much in this league. It's not really easy to sell, but these are pretty lucrative to run. At the time I'm recording this video, you want to take a Mask of the Spirit Drinker and upgrade it to a Mask of the Stitch Demon there, but that is the sort of information that's going to get obsolete really, really fast. So don't count on that. Just do a little bit of research on the various vials that you could take, or alternately, if you get one and you don't want to do that research, then you can always just try and list it for 50C, but they're harder to sell. Additionally, a temple with the 2 premium rooms together, Locus of Corruption and Doriani's Institute, it's actually worth a bit less than the sum of its parts because there's not that many buyers that are looking to get both of these simultaneously. But if you do get both of them, it'll be about 335, 340C. That's the sort of price point you can expect for that. Again, minus 20C if you want it sold immediately. As well as this though, there's a number of rooms that don't really sell, but they're really worthwhile to run. So these are the ones where you want to actually go in and run that temple. The first one is the tier 2 or the tier 3 Shrine of Empowerment. The name of the tier 2 one is the Sanctum of Unity. The name of the tier 3 one is a Temple Nexus. What these do is they add +1 to the level of monster drops throughout the entire temple. We'll get to that in a sec because it's one of those hidden things that actually adds a fair bit of value to your average temple. Then there's the tier 3 Torment Room. This creates 2 things. Firstly, it creates the most dangerous fight you'll encounter in the Temple of Atzal'atl, and that is the Architect that is the boss of the Torment Room. He will usually be possessed by at least 4, sometimes as many as 7 tormented spirits, and he will be a complete wrecking ball. But the main thing that he does that is loot positive is that he'll put a tormented spirit into every single Architect throughout the entire temple. And whilst this doesn't guarantee that they drop anything good, it's my experience that they occasionally will drop something good as a result of all the extra item quantity and all the extra item rarity that comes out of having an extra tormented spirit in them. This stuff adds up. It's not something massive, but it is something significant. And then there's a tier 3 map room. This is actually worse in 322 than it usually is, and that's because it causes the temple as a whole to drop more Awakened Sextants than usual. Awakened Sextants are cheaper this league, but there's still something that is welcome loot when it drops. Now, if you have bad options on both sides of your Incursion upgrade, always upgrade the current room. So that means kill the Temple Architect that is on the right-hand side of the room. Once you're able to raise a room to tier 3, you will never be offered that room again. And even if you've got a tier 1 room, you have a 50% chance of leapfrogging over tier 2 and going straight to tier 3, as long as you've got the entire Incursion Atlas spec. Most importantly, you've got the resource reallocation cluster. If it's not the 4th and final map, always swap to the premium rooms if you're able to do so. If it is the 4th and final map, then you always want to do this if it is a tier 2 room. So for example, if you've got the tier 2 weapon room and you get offered the Locus of Corruption, then you want to swap to the Locus of Corruption. Because of the resource reallocation cluster, you'll go to tier 3, so that'll count. But if you've got a tier 1 room, you may as well stay with the weapons one because you're not going to get anything out of having a tier 2 Locus of Corruption. The reason that you want to do this on the 1st, 2nd and 3rd incursions is that there is an RNG chance you'll get sent back to that room, and as a result that gives you a chance of getting the tier 3 version of the Corruption Chamber or the tier 3 version of the Gem Room. In the past, MinMax has worked out that it was optimal to only open a limited number of incursions under certain circumstances within a map. I don't believe that this is the case anymore. The main reason for this is that player speed has gone up and also Elva missions are a bit less precious than they used to be. You can generate more Elva missions than you used to be able to generate in the past, and that means that spending time in order to make your next Elva mission a couple of % better usually isn't worth your while. For that reason, I don't recommend using those strategies anymore, although you can definitely look up how they used to work if you're interested. It's not that they don't work, it's just that they generally don't tend to be the best use of your time. The final thing I want to talk about though is those Temple Nexus rooms, and this is the rooms that add +1 to the level of all items that drop throughout the temple. These are much better than they look. So I'd finished recording this video, I was in the middle of editing it, and I realized there was a really important thing that I left out of this part. Everything that I've said so far in this video applies to you if you're running a not tier 16 strategy for incursion temples. However, the rest of this video is going to be focused entirely on tier 16 maps. The reason for that is that this is going to be talking about item level 86 drops and ways that you can get items in temples to drop 1 level higher, which is important for generating those. However, If the temples you're running are based upon tiers that are lower than tier 16 maps, then this entire section isn't going to apply to you. So do keep that one in mind. Fractured items that are item level 86 don't generate randomly except in a few situations. Items that drop pre-fractured mostly come from rare monster conversions, and rare monsters usually are monster level 83 or lower. Now, I first learned how lucrative item level 86 fractured items could be when I was streaming recently, and I entered a trial of Ascendancy in a map. It wasn't one of the normal trials, it was one of the Uber trials because I've allocated the lab cluster on my Atlas passive tree. And while you're inside a trial of Ascendancy, these are one level higher than the exterior zone. So this is a level 84 zone because I was in a tier 16 or level 83 map. All of the rare monsters in there drop level 86 loot, and one of them dropped 2 chess pieces. They were both fractured because it had a rare monster conversion effect, and those fractures were both tier 1 life regen. Now, without thinking about it, I went back out into my hideout and I threw them into my 110C tab. Both of them sold instantly, and on a little bit of research later, I found out that they probably would have sold at 400C as well. So some item flipper made a couple hundred chaos out of my mistake there. But this is one of those cases where an item that's dropped as item level 86 has then had a fractured mod that requires item level 86 in order to roll. These are worth a lot more than you might think. Item level 86 chests have a 1 in 125 chance, give or take a little bit, to have the locked mod be tier 1 life regen, which is 2 divines at a low roll, 5 divines if it's a very high roll on that mod. Item level 86 bows are about 1 in 1200 to be locked as +2 arrows. If you hit this, congratulations, you've just had a 38 divine windfall. Also, item level 86 spine bows in bulk are easy sells at 15 to 17 bows per divine orb. So item level 86 drops in the Temple of PathOfExile absolutely require tier 2 or 3 of the Nexus Room, and also require you to make a couple of modifications to your item filter, but there is definitely a payoff there. And that's why I advocate running these temples. Don't necessarily go and sell them. It's not like there's a big market for people looking to buy these temples off you, but they are definitely worth your while running. Anyways, those are some of the things that I recommend you do with Incursion this league. I'm going to leave it there. May your gem double corrupt rooms be a bit kinder than mine were to me. It took me about 8 attempts to get my level 21 Phantasmal Searing Bond, and I didn't even need it to go to 23 quality. I was quite fine with 21/20, but it still took me 8 in order to get that. Hopefully, you'll have better luck there than I did. But in any case, I will see you around.